Sprites have danced through the pages of mythology for centuries, tiny magical nature spirits with a rich and varied history across cultures. Historical origins. The term sprite comes from Latin spiritus, breath or spirit, later adopted into French as esprit. Ancient Greek mythology linked sprites to elemental spirits like nymphs and dryads, especially those tied to water and trees. In Norse lore, they were akin to elves, mischievous forest dwellers with magical abilities. Celtic traditions introduced spriggans, treasure-guarding sprites often found near stone circles. Defining traits. Sprites are usually depicted as tiny humanoids with insect-like wings, glowing auras, or even as floating orbs of light. They're deeply tied to natural elements, air, water, forests, and wind, and often act as guardians of these realms. Known for their mischievous but mostly benevolent behavior, they might play pranks or offer guidance to pure-hearted individuals. Types of sprites: pixie forest, playful tricksters from English and Celtic folklore, nixie water shape-shifting spirits from Germanic myths, sometimes seductive or helpful, atomy air, tiny winged messengers, often attendants to larger fae, grig joy, cricket-bodied dancers known for music and revelry. Cultural variations. Slavic vilas, water spirits with divine traits, more ethereal than mermaids. Japanese kodama, tree spirits with sprite-like qualities, tied to Shinto beliefs. African yumbos, shape-shifting beings linked to ancestral spirits. Symbolism and beliefs. Sprites are often seen as protectors of nature, punishing those who harm the environment. In some traditions, they're thought to be souls of the departed, especially those tied to natural places. They're said to be drawn to pure-hearted people, sometimes aiding heroes or offering magical gifts. Sprites are more than whimsical figures. They're reflections of humanity's reverence for nature and the unseen forces that shape our world, but they differ in origin, behavior, and symbolism from other creatures like fairies, sylphs, nymphs, and yokai. Sprite versus fairy sprites are elemental spirits, often linked to air, water, or forests. Fairies are a broader category that includes sprites, pixies, and elves. Sprites tend to be more ethereal and nature-bound, while fairies can range from tricksters to regal beings with complex societies. Sprite versus sylph. Sylphs are air elementals from Renaissance alchemical traditions, especially Paracelsus's writings. Sprites may include sylphs as a subclass, but sylphs are more abstract and philosophical, often representing the spirit of air itself. Sprite versus nymph. Nymphs are Greek nature deities tied to specific locations: rivers, trees, mountains. Sprites are less divine and more folkloric, often appearing as tiny winged beings or glowing orbs. Nymphs are typically female and sensual. Sprites are gender fluid and more mischievous. Sprite versus kodama, yokai. Kodama are Japanese tree spirits, considered sacred and deeply tied to Shinto beliefs. Sprites and kodama both protect nature, but kodama are more solemn and spiritual, often inhabiting ancient trees and punishing those who harm them. Sprites are playful and mobile. Kodama are stationary guardians, bound to their host tree. Sprite versus mermaids, selkies, and nixies. Water sprites like nixies are shape-shifting and seductive, often luring people into lakes. Mermaids are half-human, half-fish beings with a more corporeal form. Selkies are seal folk who shed their skins to become human. Sprites are less physical and more magical, often appearing as light or mist. Sprites are like the heartbeat of folklore, whimsical, protective, and mysterious, yet distinct from the more structured or divine beings in mythology. Sprites shimmer across global folklore in many forms, each culture casting them as guardians, tricksters, or elemental spirits. European traditions: pixies, England and Celtic regions, mischievous forest dwellers often leading travelers astray or playing harmless pranks, found near stone circles and ancient groves. Spriggans, Cornwall, grotesque treasure guardians, sometimes mistaken for goblins, said to swell in size when provoked. Nixies, Germany and Scandinavia, water sprites that shapeshift and lure people into lakes, sometimes helpful, sometimes deadly. Atomies, England, tiny winged sprites, often attendants to larger fae. Known for their speed and stealth. Slavic mythology: vilas, ethereal water spirits, often appearing as beautiful women. They can bless or curse depending on how they're treated. Rusalkas, spirits of drowned women, haunting rivers and lakes. Their nature varies, some are vengeful, others protective. African folklore: yumbos, Senegal, shimmering, silver-haired beings who emerge at night to dance and feast. Believed to be ancestral spirits with sprite-like qualities. Japanese mythology kodama, tree spirits that inhabit ancient forests. Though not called sprites, they share similar traits: guardianship, invisibility, and deep ties to nature. Zashiki warashi, house spirits that bring good fortune. Childlike and playful, they resemble domestic sprites. Greek mythology naiads, freshwater nymphs tied to springs, rivers, and fountains. Though more divine than folkloric, they embody sprite-like roles as protectors of water. Dryads, tree spirits, often bound to a specific tree. Their fate is tied to the health of their forest. Celtic and Norse lore elves, sometimes considered sprite-like, especially the light elves who dwell in nature and wield magic. Brownies, Scotland, domestic sprites who help with chores, unless offended, in which case they become poltergeist-like. Sprites are like cultural mirrors, each one reflecting how a society views nature, magic, and the unseen. Sprites trace their cultural roots to a fascinating blend of mythologies, each shaping their traits and symbolism in unique ways. Here's a breakdown of their origins across different traditions. Ancient Greek influence. The earliest sprite-like beings were nymphs, elemental spirits tied to rivers, trees, and mountains. The term sprite itself comes from Latin spiritus, meaning breath or spirit, later adopted into French as esprit. Greek mythology also gave rise to naiads, freshwater spirits, and dryads, tree spirits, which influenced later sprite lore. Celtic and English folklore pixies and spriggans emerged from Celtic traditions as mischievous forest dwellers and treasure guardians. Sprites in these cultures were often seen as nature's protectors, punishing those who harmed the environment. The goddess Danu, mother of the Tuatha De Danann, is said to have laughed the first sprites into existence. Norse mythology sprites were closely related to elves, magical beings who lived in forests and mountains. These elves were sometimes mischievous, sometimes benevolent, and deeply tied to natural forces. Slavic traditions. Vilas and rusalkas are water spirits with sprite-like qualities, ethereal, beautiful, and sometimes dangerous. These beings often represented the souls of the departed or elemental forces of nature. African folklore. Yumbos from Senegal are shimmering, silver-haired beings who dance and feast at night. They're considered ancestral spirits with sprite-like traits, especially their connection to nature and transformation. Japanese mythology. Kodama, tree spirits from Shinto belief, share sprite-like roles as guardians of forests. Though not called sprites, their invisibility, nature-bound existence, and spiritual significance align closely with sprite lore. Sprites are like cultural chameleons, shifting form and meaning depending on the beliefs of the people who imagined them.